The U.S. signaling its readiness for diplomatic solution to the stand-up with Russia over Ukraine, while wielding the threat of sanctions against Moscow at the same time. The White House says that President Joe Biden has accepted in principle to meet with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, but only if Russia has not invaded Ukraine by then. President Emmanuel Macron of France had pitched the idea of a summit on security and strategic stability in Europe to both leaders. Paris says that Putin has also agreed in principle to the meeting. The U.S. and its allies accuse Russia of planning an invasion of Ukraine, a charge that Moscow denies. Washington says if Moscow does attack, it will be targeted with swift and unprecedented sanctions. The White House has even reportedly prepared an initial package of sanctions that includes barring U.S. financial institutions from processing transactions for major Russian banks. Now, meantime, pro-Russian groups in eastern Ukraine say that government forces have again shelled the Flashpoint region. A Russian media report cited a representative of the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic as saying that 2 civilians were killed in the shelling late on Sunday. Over the past days, eastern Ukraine has turned volatile with pro-Russia forces and the Ukrainian government, each accusing the other of violating the truce. Meantime, pro-Russia groups have evacuated thousands of residents from the Donetsk region amid fears of an imminent attack by Ukrainian government forces. The evacuees are accommodated in southwestern Russian cities. On Friday, pro-Russia forces announced plans to evacuate around 700,000 people, citing possible attacks by Kiev. Now, to discuss the issue, let me invite 2 guests. We'll have Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author from London. Also joining us will be John Bosnich, journalist, activist, and political analyst in Belgrade. Good to see you, gentlemen. Now, Marcus, what's the U.S. talking about? I mean, they're saying that they are ready, they're open in principle to a meeting, and then again they are making their threats. So what is it that they're trying to achieve?
Well, one of the reasons as to why Russia, since last year, has amassed its forces on the border with Ukraine is to try and obtain political concessions from America, specifically security guarantees. And those security guarantees involve America pledging in writing that there will be no further NATO expansion, specifically involving Ukraine. Also, that NATO will comply with the NATO-Russia Founding Act of 1997 and withdraw its forces from Eastern Europe. And also that America will dismantle its missile defense system in Eastern Europe, the components of which are in Romania and Poland. But despite what Russia is hoping to achieve by, or partly hoping to achieve, by deploying its forces on the Ukrainian border, under no circumstances will the Americans agree to any of Russia's demands, demands which are perfectly legitimate for any country which is committed to preserving its national security. And whilst I agree and applaud a meeting between Biden and Putin, the harsh reality is that there will be no agreement. Even if the Ukrainian army was to pull back from the Donbass in agreement with the Minsk Accords, there is nothing to say that in a year from now or in 2 years from now, the Ukrainian army would not again be in a position where it is now, in which it is routinely shelling the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, killing and maiming civilians of all ages. And Russia is constitutionally obliged to defend the people in the DPR and the LPR. Why? Because many of them have taken Russian citizenship as the ultimate means to ensure their safety, because the Constitution of the Russian Federation states that any Russian citizen comes under the protection of the Russian armed forces.
Okay. Now, before I ask John Bosnich my question, let me I'll read you some social media reactions to this story. Now we have Tulsi Gabbard saying that the warmongers actually want Russia to invade so that we can levy draconian sanctions on Russia and firmly establish a new Cold War, which will reap the military-industrial complex endless profit for decades to come. Then we have Mateen Eslim saying that the date of the second invasion was also lost. America is losing its credibility in the eyes of the world. Fapeng169 says Americans want this war to happen immediately, and countless lies can be created for this. And then we have Coco1979 saying that Reagan made an agreement with Gorbachev that none of the ex-Soviet pact countries would become members of NATO, that they would remain neutral. Of those countries, only Ukraine remains outside of the NATO bloc. Putin is not going to allow Russia to be outflanked by NATO. Okay, that was some social media reaction. That's not, John, the question for you is, given what's happening on the ground, all the threats, at the same time, maybe sometimes some hopes of maybe solving the issue through talks and dialogue. So how do you see things unfolding, and which direction are we headed for?
Well, I think that we're now seeing the return of Russia to the world stage in a bigger and bigger fashion after the destruction of the Soviet Union. And I think that the Russian government and President Putin are, exactly as my fellow commentator today has suggested, are protecting ethnic Russians in Ukraine. The separation of Crimea was achieved simply because the entire population of Crimea is Russian, virtually all of it. And the two separatist republics in southeastern Ukraine are by far majority ethnic Russian. And in fact, there are ethnic Russians across the entirety of Ukraine. United States military planners and the military-industrial complex who controls them would like to see a war, because they make money. First of all, we got to remember what the United States military-industrial complex is oriented around. The military-industrial complex is the biggest money-making machine in the United States of America, which is the most powerful capitalist country in the world. So the result of the war is not as important as the spending of money on a war. Mm-hmm. War is good business for America. So if there's a possibility to drag Russia into a military conflict, that's good for the American economy. If there's a possibility to provoke Russians by using Ukrainian puppet governments, as they have been doing, they will do that. But the ultimate end of this scenario is going to be a victory for Russia by the neutralization of Ukraine as a threat to the Russian people, and it will be a major failure for America, and it will show America to be the #1 military aggressor on this planet, and no one will be able to argue otherwise.
Okay, Marcus, we have 30 seconds left. If you could tell us what the solution could be to this issue.
Well, I'm of the firm opinion that the Americans are using the Ukrainian armed forces to provoke Russia into taking military action in Ukraine so that Washington can impose the most powerful sanctions on Russia that the world has ever seen. And in regard to a solution, quite frankly, I do not believe that there is a diplomatic solution here, unless, of course, a miracle occurs and America loses its foothold in Ukraine and stops coveting Ukraine and stops seeking its membership of NATO. Other than that, only Russia, by taking clinical action in Ukraine, will this matter be resolved. And millions of Ukrainians in central Ukraine, in southern Ukraine, and in eastern Ukraine would welcome Russian intervention in their country to liberate them, because those people regard themselves as part of the Russian world.
Okay, allow me to give 30 seconds to John too. John, go ahead.
Well, I'm actually more optimistic. I think the United States has already lost the battle for Ukraine. I think that President Putin is so many leagues above his adversaries in the State Department and in the White House that President Putin will be able to pull a rabbit out of the hat in this instance, and he might even be able to do it without having to use his forces. He has blocked the Ukrainian army from making a full-scale offensive on the east by surrounding the entire country. They know that if they attack in full scale, they will be destroyed. And that makes people think a little bit more logically.
Okay, on that note, we come to the end of this edition of the News Review. Thank you, my guest, Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author in London, and John Bosnett, journalist, activist, and political analyst from Belgrade. And thank you for watching this edition of the News Review on Press TV.